Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, episode 23. Today begins a 5-part mini-series on the 5 Koshas. The Connected Yoga Teacher was created so that you can easily connect to knowledge, inspiration, and a community of supportive yoga teachers. Together, we get to hear about a variety of topics from yoga teachers, but also other professionals. After I left my first 200-hour yoga teacher training, I felt like I was alone in the wilderness of yoga entrepreneurship. I quickly discovered that being a yoga teacher wasn't all about planning and teaching yoga classes, and I felt like the business side of things was where I needed to focus on top of continuing to learn, teach, and plan. With the consulting work that I do, I was hearing the same struggle from other teachers. And this is where the podcast, the website for the Connected Yoga Teacher was born. The Connected Yoga Teacher is a place where you can feel connected as a yoga teacher between the teacher trainings, classes, and workshops that you are taking. I teach weekly private and group yoga classes, so I get it. I'm right here with you, dealing with the challenges that yoga teachers face. I'm also a mother of 3. I love my work as a yoga teacher, and at the same time, I value my time spent with my partner, my family, friends, and time for myself away from my yoga business. Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you about the upcoming Define Your Yoga Niche online workshop. If you are wanting to set yourself apart in the crowded sea of yoga teachers, this is the course for you. Many of you tell me that you feel like the yoga world is saturated with teachers. And on some level, I agree with you. But I think that there is this untapped possibility here where if yoga teachers really look at their passions, their skills, their expertise, where they would like to go, they can niche down and create more abundance in terms of income, students that they're seeing, and valuable time. When I first started teaching, I decided to try and reach all populations. So I didn't know this then. This left me driving all over the place, planning and teaching at many locations to all populations, sometimes 5 classes in a day. I was teaching yoga for all levels, baby and me yoga, hot flow, prenatal, and a gentle restorative, just to end the day. At this point in my life, I felt really scattered and worn out. I experienced yoga teacher burnout to the point where I was forced to take a break. When I stepped back and got really clear on my yoga niche, I started to see more students, more income, and less driving, travel, planning time. I started to pull from many books for this work, articles, podcasts, and compiled this all together in this step-by-step because I was working with yoga teachers dealing with the same struggle. This is how it came to be a workshop. I've heard from many teachers that it works. This spring, it ran for the first time online, and now it's back with a few additions and tweaks. I'm always learning more and adding to this workshop. It is best to attend live. You get the best results that way, and it makes the course feel more like a community gathering in person. Also, there's an extra bonus for those who do attend live because it's really important to the whole group process, and it makes the questions and the workshop better each and every time. So I've added a bonus, and you can find out more about this. You can register for the workshop. Go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and click on courses. Also, last note, make sure you're on the email list. When you go to theconnectedyogateacher.com, our email list is on the front page. Everyone on our email list is going to get an early bird discount, but this is only via email. Alrighty, Connected Yoga Teachers, let's dive in. This is part 1 of the 5 Koshas. We're going to have 4 more weeks of this together. It's kind of like a summer camp if you're listening real time because it's summer here for me in Ontario, Canada. The Kosha model is something I began to look at more on my own yoga journey. Last year, I decided to study the Koshas because I felt like I was really strong in the 8 limbs, the chakras. Those were clearer in my mind, but the Koshas were still a bit of a mystery. From there, I started to be really inspired by the Kosha model. I brought it into my own yoga practice at home, and then I decided to share that in a 5-week session with some students. During my research, I found, of course, a real variation on how everyone viewed the 5 layers. I still started to take some notes, and then I decided to see what really fit for me in my own journey with this. So this is what I'm sharing with you. It's not every single bit of Kosha writing or notes that I took. It's what really resonated with me and then what I decided to share with my students. So I'm sharing my thoughts, my notes, and what I continue to learn on and off the mat. I'm also going to share a few other resources in the show notes. So make sure you go to the show notes. And on top of this, I'm compiling everything in a PDF printable that you can basically take with you to class. So if you decide that you want to do a 5-week series with your students or you want to do a workshop, you'll have all of the compiled notes on the 5 koshas, just a little bullet point that you could glance at and then remember, oh yeah, that's that part of the koshas. If you're like me, I feel a lot more comfortable with the yamas and the niyamas, the 8 limbs, and the chakra system. But take some comfort in the fact that they are actually part of the 5 koshas. So what are the 5 koshas? In an ancient Sanskrit text called the Tati Raya Upanishad, that's my best guess at how to say this, the Upanishad, which is 1,000 years older than the Yoga Sutras, the 5 koshas are described as layers, coverings, or sheaths. To have a visual, some refer to the koshas as layers of an onion or a set of Russian stacking dolls. Another analogy that I love that really works for me is that the koshas are like lampshades. I'm going to come back to that analogy in a moment. The 5 koshas consists of, these are the 5 layers. So we start with Annamaya kosha, Pranamaya kosha, Manamaya kosha, Vijnanamaya kosha, Anandamaya kosha. To get an overall visual of the 5 layers, I'm going to post a great video by Rolf Sovic in the show notes. So make sure to go to that. We're episode 23. Just click on podcast under the connectedyogateacher.com. So where are the 5 koshas? It isn't easy to define where they are because it isn't the same as asking a person, hey, where's your nose or where is your knee? I get it. I'm an anatomy geek and I like to be able to see and feel something for it to make a lot of sense to me. At the same time, I understand that we're all multi-dimensional beings. There's one layer out of the 5 that can be seen and touched. That is the Annamaya kosha, and that's where we're going to start today. It's the outer layer, the physical body. Now keep in mind, in ancient meaning 5,000 plus years old yogic texts, there's only one mention of yoga posture, and it says to find a comfortable seat for meditation. So why do we have classes full of asana, yoga poses, and very little focus on the other layers of a being and the other layers of a yoga practice? My guess is it's exactly what we just started out saying. It's easier to measure the effects of a physical yoga practice if we look at the Annamaya kosha. We can connect to our senses through the physical body. Even in my own yoga practice, I began with only a focus on the physical layer, the Annamaya kosha. But more and more I understand that a holistic approach to yoga involves all layers of self. In this 5-week mini-series, I'd like to invite you along on this journey inward. Along the way, we're going to check in with our koshas. Maybe we will become more connected to our innermost layer, which relates to a state of bliss. For sure, we're going to learn more about the qualities of each layer and come to more of an awareness of self. I really appreciate the analogy that I've heard from some yoga teachers that I talked about earlier, that the innermost layer, the Anandamaya kosha, is like a light, and that the other kosha layers are like lampshades. The light, this Annamaya kosha in the very center, shines through. And this is our goal with yoga, to try and make the shades more transparent, to allow the light to shine through. Also, I feel that it's important to avoid defining the layers so much that their dividing line is more noticeable, but instead focusing on how they're all connected to each other. Anne Bex, who is a yoga teacher in my area, shared this thought with me when she took the Koshas class series last year. I really appreciate this, Anne. I know that you tell me that you listen while you're driving in the car, so special shout out of thanks to you. Anne really talked to me about how, because I was drawing the Kosha model with 5 circles, to start to look at it, that the circles have a dotted line. So on your printout, on the PDF, you're going to see that it's kind of a mandala, and there's definitely space so that there's this movement between the 5 layers, the 5 koshas. When we look at the koshas this way, the light in our center, this bliss body or Annamaya kosha, is our true essence. The layers that cover it are what give us our personality. With time, our thoughts, our emotions, our perceptions, our likes, our relationships, our body, etc., all change. But that innermost layer doesn't change, that light inside. I'm looking forward to this journey inward together. Each week, we're going to focus on one of the 5 koshas. You can use this for your own yoga practice, or maybe out of that, you may choose to then share what you have learned in a class, a workshop, or a retreat. If you do, I would love to hear about it. So let's get started. The Annamaya kosha, the first layer in the kosha model. Anna translates to food, Maya translates to consists of, and kosha means layer or sheath. So this layer is all about the physical body. It's your skin, muscles, bones, joints, ligaments, and so much more. It's the reason most people begin yoga. It was my only reason, as I said. In my early 20s, I wanted to exercise and have a fun girls' night out. It felt great to move for an hour and then relax at the end like I was back in kindergarten at nap time. Patty Keene and Susan Proudfoot were my first yoga teachers in Wyerton. I wonder if they know the impact they had. Now, here I sit studying and writing about the koshas and sharing it with you guys in a podcast. The physical goals are usually the main focus for a lot of yoga students still. And in my opinion, this isn't a horrible thing. My own job requires a lot of sitting. I do accounting, emails. I'm sitting here right now talking to you. So moving on my mat brings me balance. I notice with yoga that I can increase my mobility, I can decrease tension, and I can increase my inner calm. I also become more aware of how I'm feeling, both physically and emotionally. So no wonder ancient yogis wanted us all to learn asanas, the yoga poses. But wait, in all of the yoga texts, there is only one mention of asana. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, it states, the meditation posture should be comfortable. That's all that's ever said of poses. It was a little shocking for me to learn this at first. For years, even as a yoga teacher, I believed that the postures of yoga were also 5,000 years old. So don't feel bad if you are one of those teachers and you're just learning it now. In the show notes, I'm putting a link to an article on the history of yoga that I found helpful. It's by Timothy Bergen, and it's on the Yoga Basics website. So there's a link in the show notes. Go to episode 23. So when did downward dog become part of what we know as yoga? According to Christopher Sartain, the author of The Sacred Science of Yoga and the 5 Koshas, our current asana practice can be tracked back to a man from South India, Krishnamacharya, and it said that he developed the vinyasa flow, which was heavily influenced by European gymnastics from the 20th century, meaning yoga poses, asanas, began only about 100 years ago. As a side note, I'm going to put this book in the show notes. And while I did find a lot of useful information in this book, it isn't one that I would suggest without a little caution to the reader. I feel like the author gives some pretty hefty opinions and beliefs, and I read it with interest and then filtered out what didn't fit for me. There is another book that I highly recommend for further study of the Koshas. If you only bought one book, I feel like this is the one. Although I don't know that I've read every book on the Koshas. I really appreciate how Gary Craftsau combines all of the elements of yoga, asana, pranayama, meditation, and more, and how he emphasizes yoga as a unique practice made to be modified to each practitioner, especially in his book called Yoga for Transformation. Again, there'll be a link to that book in the show notes. One of my favorite quotes in this book is, "It is important to remember that asana practice is not fundamentally about the asanas, but about the practitioner." So how do we bring the koshas into our own yoga practice or into a yoga class? I feel like with the Annamaya Kosha, we've got this one. We're really looking at the physical body, so we can easily look at asana, but we can take this one step further. Here's some of the things to be aware about in your own practice or to ask your students to be aware of. Notice the breath at the beginning of the class before you start moving, before you start breath practice. Also notice the breath during poses. Notice where it's easier, where it's a little more difficult. When you're looking at your own physical anatomy, lie down on the floor, and you can try this movement. So you start to move the feet like you're bouncing on a mini trampoline. Just the tops of the feet, the toes, the ball of the foot moves like it's on this mini trampoline. And you may notice that this movement translates all the way up the spine to the head. I call this movement the chi machine. I do love it. I love to stay doing that little movement until I get bored with it and then find a stillness afterwards. There's a real awareness that comes into that one alone. Another great example is guided shavasana. So you can be asking students to really be aware. And when you're doing your own shavasana, start to think, where is my body touching the floor? Where is it not touching? As you're sitting right now, maybe you're driving, start to notice, where are you touching your car seat? Where are you not? Notice the contours of the spine. If you're out walking, notice, how are you taking a step as you walk? Really start to look at the uniqueness of your own body in this moment today. Is one side feeling a little different than the other side? This is an awareness that we can bring in with our students all the time. Where is the sensation felt when you're doing a yoga pose? Are we stretching it really far? I often laugh at my friend Barb will say, okay, you sensation junkies within her yoga class, because are we going for so much sensation? Are we thinking more is better? Also starting to look at, what are our movement patterns? Are there some movement patterns that need to change for optimal health and wellness in our body? This is where it's really great to work one-on-one with a yoga teacher. If you've never done a private yoga class, I highly suggest doing one. This is where you get a unique yoga sequence that is customized to you. Within this book by Gary Craftsau, this Yoga for Transformation, there's sequences for each kosha and layer. This is what I love about this. I tried these sequences. I kept some of the poses, and then I modified the sequence for my own practice as well as for the yoga classes within my Koshas series. So this will start to get you just, it's like a springboard. Does this sequence work for you? How can you change it, modify it to work for you? So as I said, I've put together a PDF printable for you so that all of this information, you could listen to it in the car on the drive to your class, and then you would have this little PDF printable that will just trigger your mind of the points of that kosha. Now, when I did this series, I talked about the kosha a little bit at the beginning of the class. I had a visual for students to see. I drew it out on the whiteboard. And then I weaved that element in through the class and then wrapped it up at the end. So I feel like that's one of the greatest ways to do a theme. Next week, we're going to dive into the Annamaya kosha. All of them are my favorites, but I do feel like the Annamaya kosha I got very excited about when I brought it into my own practice. Just remember, connected yoga teachers, we have many resources for you, the yoga entrepreneur. There's a website, obviously this podcast. We also have a live show, and there's a community of other yoga teachers from around the world in our private Facebook group. If you would like to join that group, yes, you can join if you're in your first yoga teacher training, and you can also join if you're an experienced yoga teacher. The only qualification is that you have taken a yoga teacher training. So to sign up for this free group, visit theconnectedyogateacher.com and click on the Join Our Online Group. If you want to continue this conversation further in that group, I would love to chat about Koshas in there. Teachers post challenges, they post inspirations in there. Sometimes we have share your work post where you're invited to share something that you're working on right now. It is an amazing, supportive group. Alrighty, connected yoga teachers, have a wonderful week. Share the yoga that lights you up. Take care, and I'll see you next week.